Hello and welcome to Trust Issues with me, David Brenchley from Kepler Trust Intelligence. Today I have with me Paul Major, Co-Portfolio Manager at Bellevue Healthcare, which has the ticker BBH. Today we're going to be discussing GLP-1 therapies, commonly known as weight loss drugs. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Hi.
Now, can we just start at the beginning of GLP-1 drugs and get a bit of background? How long have they kind of been in development? What are they and what do they do?
Yeah, sure. So in the simplest terms, all of the listeners will be familiar with the sensations of feeling full, when you have that kind of heavy stomach after you've had a large meal. And equally, we'll all be very familiar with that sensation of an empty stomach, your tummy rumbling, and the desire to eat food. So there's a complex interplay of hormones and neurons involved in this. And basically, GLP-1 is one of a group of three or four hormones that are basically secreted by the lining of your intestine. GLP-1 is secreted when your intestine is full, so it's where that feeling of satiety comes from. There are other ones. There's a hormone called ghrelin, which is secreted from your stomach when it's empty, and various different ones. And these control metabolic processes. So basically, they like prime the body to absorb nutrients. So it's almost like a signal to the body. There's an inflow of nutrients coming in, get ready. So you start producing insulin, depositing protein in muscles and glucagon and all these different things. So we've known about these drugs for many, many decades. And there are various hormones that have been shown in small trials 20 plus years ago to be highly effective as weight loss agents by effectively regulating appetite. So in the simplest terms, GLP-1 gives you the sensation that your stomach is full, and as a consequence you don't feel hungry. And what that means is you eat less calories, and as everybody knows, eating less calories causes you to lose weight. The problem with a calorie restrictive diet normally is you feel hungry all the time and it's very difficult to stick to. But if you're tricking your body into thinking you've had a meal, you don't get that same sensation of hunger. And these have proven to be highly effective. In the initial stages of people taking them, they can suffer some nausea in the same way that if you ate a huge amount of food very quickly, you'd feel sick. It's that same kind of sensation, a sudden rush of GLP-1 being released, but your body acclimatizes to that over time. And what we find is that these are highly effective weight loss drugs. Now, everyone will be aware of the Novo drug Wegovy, and that's basically a long-acting GLP-1 inhibitor. And there's another drug, Zepbound from Eli Lilly, that actually targets two of these incretin hormones. So it targets GLP-1 and another one called GIP. So it's a slightly more potent and effective drug. So you lose weight slightly quicker and you lose slightly more weight on the Lilly drug than the Novo one.
And moving on to the investment kind of side of things, you obviously mentioned Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, who have kind of taken up many of the headlines in this field so far, thanks to their solutions. Share prices have performed very strongly, but BBH doesn't invest in them at the moment. Why is that?
Yeah, sure. It's a simple question of valuation and expectation. So the effective drugs for weight loss have been a holy grail of medicine for 30 or 40 years, and various approaches have been tried. Amphetamine like drugs obviously weren't very effective and had side effects, and then we've tried other ways of inhibiting the absorption of fat from the diet, which has some unpleasant consequences that we will avoid discussing on this recording, but you can kind of imagine what those might be. So this is the first time we've really had something that's certainly safe and generally well tolerated and effective. But there are challenges here. So we see this as the first step in unlocking the puzzle of weight management. And we live in an obesogenic world. Obesity is a massive driver of all kinds of health problems. Several hundred diseases are linked indirectly to obesity, and obesity is responsible for macrocardiovascular disease and cancer, right? So obesity is a massive problem for society. It's a growing problem all around the world, not just in developed markets, but in emerging markets. So we need to be able to help people manage their weight effectively. The challenge with these drugs is that again, if you go to the doctor and say, I want to lose weight, the doctor has never advocated starving yourself, because your body needs nutrients to continually replenish itself. And if you don't get enough nutrients, the body effectively eats itself. So what this means is, as you lose weight, you're not just losing the bad weight, which is fat, you're losing the good weight, which is muscle, bone mass, and other things. And the challenge with GLP-1 is that because it effectively regulates appetite, you will lose lean mass. And when you look at older people, postmenopausal women in particular, certain other groups, what you find is that you're foregoing a lot of lean mass when you're losing that weight. And that is not good because it's very hard to put muscle back on as you get older, as I'm sure you're aware. So what people are saying now is that these are a great first step, but combining these what we call incretin hormones like GLP-1 and GIP with other things that alter your metabolism to encourage fat to be burnt, for want of a better word, in preference to other things to bridge the calorie deficit created by the drugs is the objective. So what we're seeing, and this is true for Novo and Lilly as well as literally hundreds of other companies, there are dozens of combination drugs in development that target the GLP-1 system, so GLP-1, GLP-2, GIP, and then a bunch of other things that are related to that. So hormones like myostatin, which comes from muscle, ghrelin, which comes from the stomach, leptin, which comes from muscle, amylin, which comes from the pancreas, and also glucagon, which comes from the pancreas. Now, all these different combinations, we know that they are effective weight loss agents. What nobody knows, and we're going to find out the answer to over the next 12-18 months, is which combinations of these different agents in which ratios gives you this optimal loss of mass that is preferentially losing fat but preserving muscle. So that's the first goal of the next generation of therapies. The second challenge we have is that you lose weight quite fast on these drugs, but then once you've reached a target healthy weight, you need to gently keep the appetite suppressed so that people don't regain weight. And what's the best way to do that? Is it a low dose of GLP-1 or is it some other mechanism? And should it be delivered in the form of a pill or should it be an injection? Again, these are all new questions. So there's a whole new market yet to be addressed, which is the weight management market, and that's also incredibly interesting because if you went on a GLP-1 drug and you lost a meaningful amount of weight and you came off that drug, your appetite would return to where it was before. So what generally happens is you will regain in the next 6 to 12 months 60 to 70% of the weight you lost. But the problem with regaining weight, so fat cells are cunning little things. They basically they shrink rather than disappear, and they sit there waiting, ready to preferentially absorb fat that you eat. So what happens is when you regain weight, you regain fat weight very, very quickly, whereas it takes a lot of time to rebuild bone and muscle. So if you were to take a body scan of someone who'd been on these drugs for a year and then come off them and regain the weight, and you compare that to what they looked like before they started treatment, they would actually be more unhealthy after the treatment the way before because they'd have a lot more fat and a lot less muscle and probably less bone mass as well. So we need to try and trick the body into being in this kind of muscle building state while you're losing weight, so that the focus is all on losing unhealthy fat and reducing inflammation and not on damaging healthy tissue. So we're going to see a tremendous amount of innovation in this area. So coming back to why don't we own Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, if you look at their pipelines, they too are developing lots and lots of these combination therapies, and we fully agree that they will between them manage a meaningful market share over time because they've got first mover advantage. But they're not going to be dominant in the way they are today because these next generation drugs, everybody wants a piece of this action. And in the same way, the weight management market, weight maintenance market doesn't even exist yet. There is no leading company in that as yet. So there's no certainty that they will dominate that. And when we look at the valuation of Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly versus all the other opportunities out there, two things strike us. One is there's a presumption of continued success in Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. And secondly, on a relative basis, there's dramatically more value available in pursuing some of the other novel mechanisms. So that's been our approach. So are we in obesity? Yes. We're just not playing it through Novo and Lilly.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we've obviously kind of mentioned, there are numerous other kind of molecules in late stage development, testing on the way. I mean, how much of a risk do they and, kind of increased competition down the line? You see it all the time. Something, is highly successful and popular, clearly there's going to be people wanting a piece of the pie. How much of a risk do they pose for those kind of incumbents?
Well, I think they pose a significant risk. I mean, if you one of the if we take a simple analogy, let's look at the market for cholesterol lowering drugs. So everybody knows cholesterol's bad. It's a long-term risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and these days there are cheap generic statins available that lots and lots of people take, myself included. If you look at those statin prescriptions, you won't really find a prescription anymore for a statin that isn't Crestor, which was developed by AstraZeneca, or Lipitor, which was Pfizer, Warner Lambert. All the other ones that preceded it, and there were many, they've all been superseded and don't exist anymore. And the simple reason for that is that we went through four generations of statins. Each time, the next generation were significantly better tolerated with less side effects and dramatically more potent in terms of the reduction in cholesterol that you saw. So as each new wave came, the previous one was rendered obsolete. And because we're in this fairly early phase with weight loss, I think our personal view is that 5 years from now, you won't see people on GLP-1 monotherapy. Now, that doesn't mean that Lilly's drug, which is already a combo, isn't going to do very well. But I think Novo will have superseded Wegovy with something else. And I think if you look across, Roche, Amgen, AstraZeneca, all these big companies, they all have skin in this game. And there are dozens and dozens of biotechs with unpartnered molecules, Zealand and so on, as an example that people might be aware of. Um, the next wave of competition is yet to be decided, and it's going to be decided ultimately on efficacy and tolerability. Because again, if we go back to the original GLP-1 drugs that we have today, the long-acting ones, let's not forget that around a third of patients struggle to tolerate them in the induction phase, and they're not effective in a significant proportion of patients. So probably half the patients that try GLP-1s don't stick them, because they don't work as well as they should do, or they can't tolerate the initial nausea that you get as your body adjusts to having the drug on board. So there's a significant amount of room in the market just to improve that. So we definitely see market share looking very different 5 years from now as it does today. But I'm more than happy to admit that based on the data available today, I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know who's going to be successful. So the one thing I'm certain of is I'm not going to pay for presumed success, and I'm going to take a portfolio approach across multiple companies and multiple mechanisms to make sure that the likelihood that I pick a winner is as high as possible, because they're just the data isn't advanced enough yet to know which of this myriad of combinations is going to be the one that ultimately takes the lead.
And you mentioned that BBH does have exposure to companies in this area. Can you talk through that a little bit?
So we have probably now, I'd say 5 or 6% of the portfolio split across 3 or 4 companies that have at least one additional modality across these different areas that I've talked about. Amylin looks very promising, myostatin's interesting, glucagon's interesting. So across those mechanisms, we have exposure with several companies. They're all in phase 2. We're expecting to see meaningful data during 2025 that will ultimately resolve whether or not these are competitive. And the critical thing for us with all of these is they are all currently unpartnered assets. So these companies are likely to either sell these to, a Merck or a Pfizer or whoever, or be acquired by a company like that in the next iteration of this market. So we're very much focused on the science, and I think there are a couple of other important things here for us. We've heard all the stories about Novo and Lilly struggling to produce enough of these drugs to meet demand because they're proteins and they're complex. One of the other filters that we applied, as well as known provable science that goes back many decades in terms of the mechanism, we've chosen to focus on companies where we are confident from a chemistry point of view, these drugs can be made cheaply at scale. So that if they are successful, they can address potentially a very large market reasonably quickly.
Now, clearly, GLPs, weight loss drugs, are one of many exciting innovations happening in healthcare right now, biotechnology, etc., that BBH has exposure to. Are there any that you're kind of particularly excited about?
Well, we continue to feel that one of the most underappreciated areas in healthcare generally, and one of the key challenges in the broader kind of cost puzzle of making healthcare more effective, is on the diagnostic side. And lots and lots of people are excited about new molecules and new drugs and all these sorts of things. But what's really, really important is disease identification and disease prevention. It's far, far easier to treat somebody if their disease isn't well advanced. And if you take it to extremes with things like cancer, it's potentially life-changing depending how early on that journey that you can go. And we see potential for very significant advances in population screening efforts around all manner of different cancers. And that's something that we continue to find really, really exciting, because the cost benefit side for society is tremendously positive. And of course, it doesn't have the same risk characteristics as investing in pharmaceuticals. Ultimately, the development of diagnostics is in some ways a longer process, but as the data rolls out, you can see very clearly whether or not something is an effective and predictive diagnostic. And as we unpick the genome to a greater and greater extent, we're finding more and more effective ways to screen people very early for very, very serious diseases. And that will remain, I think, a big focus for us. And that's a differentiating point for us from many of our peers who are much more, say, pharmaceutically oriented in their approach to investing in healthcare.
Small cap and healthcare, which BBH is kind of biased towards both of those areas. Clearly, they've been out of favour recently. I mean, what do you see as the outlook for both areas?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, healthcare struggled 22 and 23. It struggled in the initial part of 24. It did well April through to August, and then over the last 6 weeks is again it really lagged the market quite severely. And then small mid cap has been out of favour in part, I think. People have been concerned about liquidity and funding and all these sorts of things, and duration. High interest rate environments generally penalise smaller companies in a very simplistic way. But also, it's just been a very unusual stock market. If you look at where returns have been generated, it's the narrowest market we've seen since the 1970s. It's a few companies in tech. It's a few. If you look at healthcare in 23, almost the entire return of the MSCI World Healthcare you could attribute to Novo and Lilly, for example. So it's been a very, very challenging environment, and you're absolutely right. The market over the last 18 months, 2 years, has not rewarded smaller companies for positive progress with their businesses in the same way it does larger companies. If you're a large company, you beat earnings, you raise guidance, your share price goes up. If you're a small company, you do that, often nothing happens. This is resulting in a very big valuation gap emerging between those two areas of the market, and there's no rational reason why that should persist for any period of time, even though we obviously have seen this for quite a period of time now. So we remain optimistic that the market will begin to differentiate and look again at these things and realize that there's significant value there. And I think we are seeing some signs of life in biotech in particular since the first interest rate cut came through in the United States, it having been an area that's been one of the worst performers over the last couple of years, for example.
Sure. Now, hopefully, that gives listeners a bit more background in the area of weight loss drugs, but also, some of the other kind of exciting innovations happening in healthcare that BBH has exposure to. I would definitely urge listeners to visit the BBH website to read Paul and his co-manager Brett's excellent blogs. And also, of course, don't forget to check out the KTI website for the latest notes on BBH. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.